Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Vaughn Sports Madness, Episode 2. I am Hiram Vaughn, your host for the day. A very pleasant good evening to you all, wherever you may be. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Still kind of in the early stages of this, obviously, just being our second episode. I thought initially that we would go ahead and do an episode every day. I'm thinking, right now, every other day should be sufficient. We didn't really miss out on anything, so we'll just kind of play it as needed. So just go ahead and stay tuned to the channel Vaughn Sports Madness. Make sure you subscribe. Invite all your friends to subscribe. Share what we've got here. If you like it, please feel free to give me some feedback. Let me know what you think of what's going on. Man, we got a lot of stuff to cover today. The Preakness Stakes was today. We're going to discuss whether or not Nyquist's bid for the Triple Crown continues. See if we'll have back-to-back Triple Crown winners. We're going to talk Eastern Conference playoffs tonight. Cleveland looking to take a 3-0 lead on Toronto. The Eastern Conference Stanley Cup playoffs are tonight. We'll talk about the Western Conference Stanley Cup playoff that happened last night. Played out kind of like how we talked about. And a lot of other stuff to talk about. Got U.S. has their friendly with Puerto Rico tonight in men's soccer. May spend a little bit of time on that. Again, we broke that down just a little bit the other day. Not a whole lot to break down in that one, but we'll go ahead and we'll just dig in, get right to it. First of all, and I've got to do this. Those of y'all who've watched anything that I've posted up to this point, you know that I was the play-by-play voice for the University of Arkansas at Monticello baseball team. I wasn't able to make the trip up to St. Cloud, Minnesota this weekend for their super regional. They actually lost their first postseason game yesterday to Minnesota State Mankato 7-6. That's the fourth time that they've played this year, and all four games have been one-run games. An exciting game there. And then they came back today and they won 2-1. With an RBI walk-off sac fly by the catcher Travis Stanke to push ahead that winning run. So they continue, and they will take on the winner of the St. Cloud State Emporia State game that's going on right now, an elimination game going on up in St. Cloud, the number one team in the nation, the St. Cloud Huskies. They're in a bit of a battle. They're in their second 11-inning game of the tournament as we speak, and I'm kind of keeping an eye on that while we're doing this. So if I look a little distracted, I apologize, but that's what's going on right there. So I got to give a shout out to the folks out at the University of Arkansas at Monticello. Their sports information director Brian Ramsey, a good friend of mine, the guy who's doing the play-by-play for UAM out there for this tournament, Jimmy Sledge. And then, just athletic director Chris Ratcliffe, and of course, UAM baseball coach John Harvey, and just that tremendous team that they have. Their 38 wins on the season, a school record, still going. So, I got to give a shout out to those guys out there for a tremendous season. We'll go ahead and start with the Preakness Stakes today, the second leg of the Triple Crown. Going into the race, Nyquist coming in 5-0, undefeated. His closest competitor is Exaggerator, owned by Kent DeSormo, raced by Keith DeSormo, and the conditions at Preakness today were just terrible up in Baltimore. Terrible conditions. Preakness was raced in sloppy conditions. That's really nothing new for horse racing. They'll race in pretty much anything as long as they're not lightning. They'll go ahead and they'll go ahead and have those races. But two horses died today in the undercard races. And they were both attributed directly to the track conditions. And let me be clear, I like horse racing. I'm not one of these guys that thinks, horse racing is terrible and it should be banned. No, I like horse racing. I'm a fan of it. I'm not a big fan of dog races, but I am a big fan of horse racing. Now, when a horse dies in one of the undercard races, because of track conditions, you've got to kind of keep an eye on it. If two horses die directly attributed to track conditions, you've got to do something. And I understand that this is a major event. It's, they had 150,000 people just in the infield at Pimlico today, plus everyone in the grandstand. So, this huge deal, national television. But when you have multiple horses die as a direct result of the track conditions, you've got to pull that trigger and you've got to try something else. I'm not, if whatever, move it to another day, move it to later on. Race under the lights if you have to, something. But you can't do that to these horses. And so prefacing everything with, there was just kind of a pall over the whole day. Now, the race at the Preakness itself, against sloppy track. Nyquist had never raced on a sloppy track before in his career, and Exaggerator won the Santa Anita Derby in convincing fashion in a sloppy track. So it was pretty well known that Exaggerator would do well. Nyquist was kind of the unknown variable here, and the concern all along was, well, with a sloppy track, not being comfortable with it, if the pace got off to a torrid start, or a toxic start, as they term it, that, Nyquist might not be able to sustain. Well, Nyquist jumped out to an early lead. He kind of got sandwiched early on between a couple of the longer shot horses. He stayed with him, and then finally, about 3/4 of the way through the race, he was able to break free from that. But then Exaggerator made that move that he's been making in every race. In every single race, he's fallen behind 10 lengths, 12 lengths, 15 lengths, and he did the same in this one. Fell behind 13 or 14 lengths, like in the first quarter. It like way far back. But Nyquist went farther than Nyquist was pushed harder at the beginning than he had to be pushed all year. Well, then when he got to the final 3/8 or so, he just ran out of steam, and Exaggerator passed him up, and then eventually Cherry Wine passed him up, and so the Kentucky Derby, and who was the 3-5 favorite to win the Preakness, ended up finishing third, with Cherry Wine finishing second, Exaggerator finishing first by like 4 lengths. So, solid race for Exaggerator, not a good race for Nyquist, and, they're all going to kind of go back to the drawing board now and figure out what do we do at this point. Not much that can be done. We're not going to have a Triple Crown winner this year. So American Pharoah will remain the most recent Triple Crown winner for at least another year. And, we went a very long time between Triple Crown winners before. I want to say 37 years between Triple Crown winners before American Pharoah last year. So Exaggerator, the winner of the Belmont Stake, the Preakness Stakes, and he has announced that he will race at Belmont. Nyquist is not is non-committal yet on whether or not they're going to race there. They kind of wanted, like I said, regroup and see exactly what they've got going on there. Cherry Wine really came out of nowhere. Long shot, 15-1 shot. Came in there and finished second, so a solid race there. And undoubtedly, we'll see Cherry Wine at the Belmont as well. And presumably, the conditions won't be as bad. This is probably one of the worst looking tracks that I've seen ever in a Triple Crown race. It was pretty bad. And so they're gonna, everyone's gonna kind of reevaluate. Nyquist handlers, owners, trainer, jockey, everybody knows that this is not indicative of a normal race that Nyquist would run. So, they're weighing all of that very carefully. Given that, I don't know. It bothers me that if a horse is going to race the first two, that they're not going to race the third leg, even if they don't win the first two. My thing is, if you're going to race those two, race all three. Go ahead and do it. And I'm actually somewhat in agreement with Bob Baffert in his philosophy toward it, is that you should not race Belmont if you're not going to race both Kentucky and Preakness. And I'm somewhat in agreement there, because what happens now is these races, it's 2 weeks between the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, and then 3 weeks between Preakness and the Belmont. And so, for horse racing, that's pretty strenuous, and there's a lot of travel that goes in between, because they're going to take them home between the races too. They're not just going to keep them on the road the entire time. And these horses, they work best under familiar circumstances, just like people do. You're going to work better when you're under familiar circumstances in situations that you know well. And so, but what happens is you'll have horses they'll race Kentucky, because you notice the Kentucky Derby usually has a huge field, 22, 23, 24 horses. Preakness always is half that or less. And usually it's comprised only of people that are the horses that race at Churchill Downs. Well, Belmont is then usually bigger than the Preakness, because you have a whole bunch of horses now that they're 1 3/4 specialists. And so they don't race Kentucky, they don't race Preakness, but they're going to go in there and they're going to spoil some horse's bid for the Triple Crown. Not because they're the best of the three horses, but because they specialize in this one area. And Bob Baffert, threw a fit after American Pharoah won the first 2 rounds. And he almost himself said, we're not going to Belmont unless they make it to where you can only race Belmont if you do the other 2. Obviously, that didn't happen. But he went to Belmont and won anyway. And in impressive fashion at that, over horses that only race the 1 3/4 distance. These races are all different lengths, different styles, and it's designed that way. That's why the Triple Crown is so hard to win. They're different races, different styles, different horses, different competition. But I think it's pretty shady that you're going to have people these racers and these trainers, that their only purpose in racing the Belmont is to prevent someone from winning the Triple Crown. Not that they have any desire to win it themselves, because these horses, they would never race in Kentucky. They would never race at Preakness. But they're going to race at Belmont to prevent someone from winning. And how many times have we seen it? Multiple times over the last 20 years. Horses that didn't race either at Churchill Downs or at the Preakness come in and upset a Triple Crown bid. And I don't know, I think it's pretty sorry. I think you either race all 3 or you don't race any. And there are plenty of horse races around this country that you can go into. You can race in Arkansas, you can race in Texas, you can race in California, go to Santa Anita, that's a big one. There are other races in Kentucky, in Maryland, in Virginia that you can go to. You race in Florida, race in, anywhere where they have the horse racing, do it. But, no. I feel like the Triple Crown races should be reserved solely for horses going for the Triple Crown. Having said that, is it going to change? No. Because here's what's going to happen. A lot of horses did back out of Belmont last year, and so when American Pharoah did win the Belmont last year, again convincingly, there were only like 6 horses in the race. So a lot of people held out after that. But I'm a believer that you should either race all 3 or don't race any. That's the end of segment 1 here on Sports Madness episode 2. We will be back in just a moment with part 2.